Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Fields. I'm the Curator of Natural History for the museum. Today we're going to take a little behind the scenes tour here at the museum into the various collection storage areas. Obviously, museums have to have storage, and there are reasons for that. We simply can't put everything on exhibit at the same time. But even if we had unlimited exhibit space, we still wouldn't put all of our collections out. There's actually a reason for keeping some of those collections behind the scenes. We'll talk about that in a moment. But of course, we do have things behind here that we'll keep for future exhibits and a few other interesting items that take the place of real animal collections that we sometimes use for exhibit. So come with me now as we take that behind the scenes tour. So in some cases, we just have items, as I said, that we can't put all on exhibit all at one time. This room is where we store the Carolina Piedmont specimens, because the Carolina Piedmont is a vital part of our mission here at the museum. And you may look at some specimens and say, well, I don't recognize those from this area. But we not only keep things from the Piedmont present, but also from historic times, hundreds of years ago. And occasionally we keep items that had an affinity here in prehistoric times, such as animals that lived here during the Pleistocene, but that now are moved on to other areas. Part of the job of being a curator or a collections manager is keeping up with the collections. And while that may sound silly, we do need to track their movements when we take them off of storage and put them on exhibit, for instance. And in fact, that's exactly what we've done here with a few of the items that would normally be in this storage cabinet. We had several chipmunks that were mounted taxidermy specimens that we put in a recent exhibit. Once those are taken from storage from their resting place, we have to fill out what's called an object removal tag. And that gives us an idea of what the animal was that was in the space and gives us an idea of when we expect it to be back to its regular place when it comes off of exhibit. So object removal tags and also tracking in our computer inventories our specimen movements is very important. So some of these items that we use on exhibit are not really specimens at all, but reproductions or casts of animals. For instance, this northern water snake. You can see that it's not a real animal, but it is very lifelike, and it's been painted to look very much like the real thing. And we've used this in several exhibits. So having these casts from the original specimens, and there are companies that actually do this, facilitates our exhibits quite nicely. This was a hand-painted cast. This is what one of the casts would look like before it's painted. This is the way it comes to us. So this is actually a small corn snake that will hopefully one day be painted and placed on exhibit. Sometimes you can order the cast already painted, but as you can see, the detail is not as nice as when you have a custom hand-painted job. So if we ever do use this one that came already painted, we'll probably put it in a low light situation or even have one of our exhibits preparators do a custom paint job to improve the detail before it goes on exhibit. We don't have just snakes, we do this for other reptiles. This is a nice mud turtle and musk turtle that can be used someday for exhibit. We do the same for fish and amphibians. So things that don't do well with taxidermy will be quite nice used as exhibit support specimens when we use reproductions and casts. So now we'll take a look at some of those collections that, again, even if we had room to put everything on exhibit, we wouldn't. And you may wonder why a museum would keep such collections. Well, exhibiting specimens and educating the public is just part of what museums do, especially natural history museums. We also keep specimens in what are called research or synoptic collections. For instance, we're attempting to build a collection of Carolina Piedmont vertebrates here at our museum. That's fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. And the way we prepare and store them is not in lifelike positions for exhibits, but rather to prepare them and keep them in relatively small spaces with all the pertinent information on tags so that they can be used for research. And not only can scholars and students come in and use them for those purposes, they can also serve as important resources for people who are writing papers. And the fact that we have field guides today are actually based on a lot of work by people who had access to museum specimens in the past. So let's take a look at some of the birds and the mammals in the museum's collection of Carolina Piedmont specimens. So you see that these cabinets have drawers in them, and the specimens are inside the drawers, but you'll notice the labels. We keep them arranged taxonomically. That means by the way that science classifies the specimens. But for inventory purposes, I also place numbers on these drawers so that that can be cross-referenced in our computer inventory. So we have the ability to look up the specimens either by their scientific names or by their location in the cabinets. So in this drawer, we have specimens that are in what we would call the warbler family and their relative specimens. For example, this specimen here is called the northern water thrush, and you can see the way it's been prepared is actually the skin has been stuffed and placed on a stick here so that it can be easily manipulated without having to touch the specimen a lot. The oils from your fingers and dirt and grime can actually get on specimens over the long term. So the less we actually touch the specimen itself, the better. But you'll see that the specimen also has a tag here, and this has all the pertinent information, the way the museum tracks it, its taxonomy, its catalog number, the locality, measurements, and any other remarks that are necessary. And this data is very important for the specimen. So you can see these two specimens side by side here. I have the water thrush in this hand, and in this hand I have a closely related species called an ovenbird. And you can see there are some close similarities to them, and that's another reason it's important to have these kinds of collections, because we can look at and study the differences and the similarities in closely related warbler species in the Carolina Piedmont. And this lets us know what these animals look like at a certain place at a certain time. Larger museums have cabinets full of specimens like this that can number in the hundreds of thousands. And we may never have that many here in the Carolina Piedmont, but we can certainly begin a small synoptic collection for comparative studies. In addition to the birds, we also keep what are called study skins of mammals. So I'll show you a few of those now from the Carolina Piedmont. Something that should be quite familiar to you is the possum. And these can be made into study skins, sort of traditionally like we think of for the birds. Obviously it's in a larger scale. So the mammals are kept in a position like this so that we can fit several of them in one of these storage drawers. We actually have 3 in here. And with mammals, it's also customary to keep at least the skulls, and in some cases the entire postcranial skeletons with the skins, because mammals can provide a lot of good information, especially with their skulls and their teeth. So it's important to salvage those whenever we can. Here we have drawers of smaller mammals, a lot of the rodents that are in the area, the rats and the mice in particular. And in order to preserve space, I have the study skins in the form that you see here, and then I keep their skulls in these very small plastic bottles. And they are somewhat protected, and we can keep a lot of them in a small space here. So every curator has his own tricks for minimizing space requirements in these kinds of collections, and this is mine. So in addition to the bird and mammal study skins that I just showed you, we do keep specimens of fish, amphibians, and reptiles in the permanent collection for the Carolina Piedmont. But these have to be kept in a fluid to preserve them over time. And typically that fluid is either formalin or ethanol, which is the same as ethyl alcohol. I don't like to use formalin or formaldehyde because it can have some health-related issues associated with it. So I preserve my specimens in 60 to 70% alcohol solution. So you can see here we have some fish, and some of these specimens go back quite a ways. A lot of these are more than 50 years old. They do tend to lose their coloration over time, but they're still valuable specimens. They have tags with them, just like the other specimens I showed you. And nowadays, with the advent of molecular biology and DNA studies, these specimens can actually serve as tissue samples and have extractions made to study their DNA. And these kinds of collections have become increasingly important in the last 20 years. So I really hope to build a collection of Carolina Piedmont fish, amphibians, and reptiles over time. In these cases, we keep fossils, and although the Piedmont region, because of its geology, does not preserve fossils well, we do have a variety of fossils that come from the Carolina coastal plain. And most paleontologists agree that when it comes to large animals that lived here in the past, if they were alive on the coastal plain, they probably existed here in the Piedmont too, even though we don't have direct evidence of their presence here through fossils. So lots of these are just bits and pieces, but there's some really important finds in here. For instance, we have several different fossils. This is actually a leg bone from a saber-toothed cat from a 450,000-year-old site in Harleyville, South Carolina. This was a specimen that the State Museum let us have for our collection because they had such great specimens. So it documents a species that lived here in the Carolina Piedmont as well. So in addition to saber-toothed cats, we have lots of other carnivores here. We had dire wolves and animals related to them. We had bears, short-faced bears, cave bears, and then of course we still have specimens that are still alive today, like raccoons. And so this is a raccoon jaw from the Ice Age or the Pleistocene. Tells us of a time when we had small mammals of today mixed with the much larger mammals of the Ice Age past. So our last stop on this behind-the-scenes tour of collection storage is the room where we keep non-Carolina Piedmont specimens and oversized specimens. And by oversized, I mean things that are too large to fit through a standard doorway. And a lot of the things in here, as you'll see, are not from the Carolina Piedmont. We had a large African exhibit in this museum at one time, and while we still maintain some African specimens on display, they're part of our global biodiversity connections that we talk about with the Carolina Piedmont. So a lot of these animals are still here and probably going to be finding new homes elsewhere across the United States in Smithsonian affiliated museums like our own. So we'll let you take a look around here. Hope you enjoy what you see. And I have thoroughly enjoyed this tour with you now.